Lily had lived in the city her entire life, so when her Aunt Eliza passed and left her an old mansion in the country, she was both excited and hesitant. She had never seen the house on Hollow Hill before, nor had she heard any mention of it from her family. It seemed odd that Aunt Eliza had owned such a place in secret, but Lily pushed her curiosity aside, deciding it might be a good escape from her busy, overwhelming life. The house was as grand as it was ominous, a looming structure that had clearly stood the test of time but had been worn by years of neglect. Its cracked, ivy-covered stone walls stretched up to steep gables, and tall, narrow windows stared out like watchful eyes. When Lily arrived, the sky was dark and overcast, casting deep shadows that stretched across the property. The front door creaked loudly as she pushed it open, revealing a grand foyer covered in dust. High ceilings with faded murals and dark wood paneling greeted her, their age adding to the sense of mystery that hung in the air. She clutched her suitcase tightly and took a deep breath, feeling the emptiness of the house settle heavily around her. Lily spent the first day exploring, marveling at the old paintings and tapestries that lined the halls. The rooms were filled with antique furniture, relics from another time, their beauty dulled by years of dust and disuse. As she ventured further, she noticed small things that unsettled her: a cracked mirror that seemed to cast distorted reflections, doors that were locked tight with no visible keyholes, and a faint, cold draft that swept through certain rooms, carrying with it the smell of damp earth. By evening, Lily was exhausted but strangely on edge. The silence of the house was unnatural, pressing against her like a weight. She found herself jumping at every creak and groan of the old structure, her imagination running wild with thoughts of what might be lurking in the dark corners. To calm her nerves, she lit a few candles and settled into the parlor with a dusty old book she'd found on one of the shelves. As she read, she heard a faint noise, like the sound of soft footsteps above her. She froze, straining to listen, but the sound stopped just as suddenly as it had started. She tried to brush it off, convincing herself that it was just the house settling. But as the minutes passed, the noise returned, growing louder and more deliberate, as if someone was pacing back and forth in one of the upstairs rooms. Heart-pounding, Lily decided to investigate. She grabbed a flashlight and made her way up the creaky staircase, every step echoing in the empty house. The upper floor was even darker and colder than the rest of the house, and as she walked down the hallway, she felt as though she was being watched. She shone her flashlight around, revealing rows of closed doors, each one leading to an unknown part of the house. The sound seemed to be coming from the end of the hall, where a single door stood slightly ajar. She approached cautiously, her hand trembling as she reached for the doorknob. Pushing the door open, she found herself in an old nursery. The room was filled with broken toys, faded wallpaper with whimsical designs, and a small, empty crib. The air was thick and musty, and the silence was suffocating. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye. On the wall beside the crib, there was a mirror, cracked and worn, but in the dim light, she could see the faint outline of a figure standing behind her. She spun around, but there was no one there. Heart racing, she backed out of the room and closed the door, deciding she had had enough exploration for one night. Back in her bedroom, she tried to sleep, but the silence of the house was too oppressive, filling her with a growing sense of dread. Just as she was beginning to doze off, she heard it again, the sound of footsteps, this time right outside her door. She lay there, frozen, listening as the footsteps grew louder, closer. Then, they stopped. She waited, heart pounding, but nothing happened. Gathering her courage, she got up and opened the door, peering out into the dark hallway. There was no one there. But as she closed the door and turned back to her bed, she saw something that made her blood run cold. On the floor, near the foot of her bed, were small, muddy footprints. They were too small to belong to an adult, and they led from the door to the foot of her bed before disappearing. She felt a cold chill run down her spine, and she backed away slowly, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The next day, she searched the house, trying to find any explanation for what she had seen. She looked for hidden rooms, secret passages, anything that could explain the footsteps and the strange occurrences. But the more she searched, the more she felt the house closing in on her, as if it was hiding something, watching her. She found an old journal in one of the drawers, worn and faded but still legible. As she read through the entries, she began to piece together a dark and tragic story. The journal belonged to a young woman named Evelyn, who had lived in the house many years ago. Evelyn wrote about her daughter, a little girl named Annabelle, who had died tragically in the nursery. The entries grew increasingly erratic, filled with despair and sorrow as Evelyn described how she could still hear her daughter's laughter, how she felt her presence in the house. The final entry sent a chill through Lily's bones. Annabelle is still here, watching, waiting. She won't let me leave. The house has become her prison, and now, it will be mine too. Terrified, Lily decided she had to leave. She packed her things quickly, refusing to stay another night in the cursed house. But as she tried to leave, she found that every door she opened led to another room in the house. The windows were impossible to open, and the main door, which had been unlocked when she arrived, was now bolted shut from the inside. Panicking, she ran from room to room, desperately trying to find a way out. The house seemed to twist and shift around her, the hallways stretching and bending in impossible ways. Shadows danced along the walls, and she heard faint giggles, the laughter of a child echoing through the empty halls. As night fell, she found herself back in the nursery, the room she had been trying to avoid. The door slammed shut behind her, and the temperature dropped, her breath visible in the freezing air. She could feel a presence behind her, something watching her, waiting. Slowly, she turned to face the mirror, and there, reflected in the cracked glass, was a little girl in a tattered dress, her face pale and expressionless. The girl's eyes met Lily's, and a cold, empty smile spread across her face. Lily backed away, pressing herself against the wall, but the girl stepped closer, her hand reaching out toward her. She could feel the cold fingers brushing against her skin, and as she screamed, the girl's grip tightened, pulling her into the darkness. The next morning, the house on Hollow Hill stood silent and empty once again. The neighbors noticed the lights had gone out, and the air around the house felt colder, heavier. Some claimed to hear faint whispers and giggles coming from inside, but no one dared to enter. And somewhere in the old house, hidden among the dust and shadows, was a new journal, with a fresh entry scrawled in desperate, trembling handwriting. She won't let me leave. The house has become my prison, and now, it will be someone else's. The house waits, silent and patient, for its next guest.
Трава работала, перед нами, ай, сектор, по лесу, ой, сектор, по лесу.